The order came down as a salvage run, nothing more. Strip the Vessenhall shrine for anything with resale value, log the structural failure for the insurers, be back at the lighter before the second sunset. 9 years dead, the file said. The dome had cracked open during the Calais succession crisis. The containment core inside had gone unstable, and whoever was keeping watch over it that day was listed among the unrecovered. No survivors. I had read that line on the manifest twice before we touched down, the way you read a thing you already believe. I was the one who went in deepest, because I always am. Crawl space work, tight seams, the kind of job that pays well because most people's shoulders don't fit. The shrine's lower galleries were dark, except where the dome had split, and let in long blades of daylight, dust hanging in them like something underwater. I expected silence. I got a maintenance log instead, scratched into the stone beside a water reclaimer that should not have still been running, tally marks in groups of 30, counting years the careful way a person counts when no one is coming to check their math. The tally marks ran the whole length of the corridor wall, low down, scratched at a height that told me whoever made them had been sitting, not standing, for most of the work. I counted 9 full groups before the marking stopped, and somewhere around the 7th group my hands had gone still on the rock, because 9 years is a long time to keep score of your own survival, with nothing sharper than a piece of broken conduit. I followed the reclaimer's lines back to a sealed chamber, and found her sitting upright against the containment housing, one leg pinned under a fallen support strut, a coil of cable wrapped tight above the wound, the way you'd do it yourself if there was no one else left to do it for you. The chamber smelled of mineral dust and old ozone, and the light through the cracked dome above fell across her in one clean column, like the planet itself had aimed it there on purpose. She had a length of pipe across her knees, gripped like she meant to use it. Her eyes were amber, steady, furious, and not afraid of me in any way I recognized as fear. "You're 9 years late," she said, in passable trade tongue, like she'd practiced the sentence for when someone finally arrived to hear it. I told her I wasn't supposed to be here for her at all. I told her the manifest had her listed as gone. She said the manifest was written by men who left before the dust settled, and asked, with more contempt than I'd ever heard fit into 4 words, whether I intended to finish the job they'd started. I didn't answer that. I got the strut off her leg instead. It took the better part of an hour, with a hand jack and language she didn't trust, and she watched every motion of my hands the whole time, like she was still deciding whether to use the pipe. The leg was bad, old break healed wrong over a worse one, infection working at the edges. Field kit wasn't built for her physiology, but pain reads the same in most species I've worked beside, and so does relief when it finally lets go. She didn't make a sound either way. I learned later that not making a sound had become a discipline with her, like the water reclaimer, like the tally marks. One more thing she did, because no one else was left to do it. I asked her, somewhere in the middle of cleaning the wound, why she'd stayed at all, once the guard ran. There would have been a window, I figured, in those first chaotic days, when she could have followed them out and let the shrine and its failing core be someone else's problem eventually. She looked at me like the question itself was the strange part. "Someone has to read the gauges," she said. "It doesn't matter whose name is on the duty roster once everyone with a name on it is gone." She told me while I worked what the containment core actually was. Not a relic, not a treasure for my manifest, but a fracture in the planet's old power grid that had been bleeding radiation into the valley aquifer since the dome cracked. Her guard had been assigned to monitor it on a rotation. When the dome failed and the readings spiked, the rotation broke and ran, and somewhere in the panic, the official record decided it was easier to declare the post empty than to ask who'd been left standing on it. She'd kept the seal from failing further for 9 years, with nothing but the tools the shrine still had, and a discipline nobody had asked of her, because the valley below had 3 settlements in it, and somebody had to. I asked her name. Not her title. I'd have to be a worse listener than I am not to have caught by then exactly who she was, but her name, the one that belonged to her before the crown did. "IN," she said, like she was testing whether the word still worked in her mouth after 9 years of disuse. I gave her my canteen, because it was the only whole thing I had to offer that wasn't a tool. She drank like she'd forgotten what water tasted like when it wasn't rationed to the half-liter, and when she handed it back, her hand was shaking, not from the leg. The crew called twice while I sat with her. Pickup window closing. Mission parameters salvage only. Command wanting confirmation. I had what we came for. The third call I let go to silence. By then, I'd already decided I wasn't leaving that chamber with a crate of stripped parts and a clear conscience. When the lighter finally set down close enough to reach by foot, my crew chief met me at the shrine mouth, already arguing before I'd said a word. Extraction order didn't cover a passenger. Insurance didn't cover a passenger. The manifest, he said again, like the word itself was a wall, didn't have a line for a queen nobody had paid us to find. He reminded me that the company didn't run a rescue service, that the rotation had been declared closed 9 years back by people with more authority than either of us, and that whatever I'd found down there wasn't technically our problem to solve. I told him to amend it. He laughed, short and disbelieving, and asked what exactly I thought I was going to do. Carry her out myself if the company wouldn't authorize the birth. He wasn't a cruel man, my chief, just a tired one running numbers that had never once accounted for a person still breathing under 9 years of dust, and I understood that even while I told him no. I told him that was exactly the plan. Ian stood in the chamber doorway behind me on a leg that could barely hold her, one hand braced on the stone, and she didn't ask me to fight for her. She'd clearly stopped expecting anyone to, somewhere around year 3 or 4, and built a whole life of discipline around not needing it. That was the thing that decided me, more than the leg or the tally marks or the 9 years, the way she stood there ready to go back down into the dark rather than ask. I won't leave you, I said, to her, not to my chief, because she was the one who needed to hear it land. Whatever they put on the manifest, I won't leave you here. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't the kind of thing you rehearse. But her face did something I hadn't seen it do in the hour I'd known her. The furious composure cracked just slightly at the eyes, just enough to show me what 9 years of not breaking had cost her to hold. My chief signed the amendment in the end, mostly because I made it clear I'd be walking off this rock on my own 2 feet beside her, whether the company's paperwork agreed or not, and a salvage crew short one engineer costs more than a passenger berth. I carried her the last stretch myself, her arm braced over my shoulders, out past the cracked dome and into daylight she hadn't stood under since the year her guard ran. She stopped walking entirely when the light hit her face, and for a moment, she just stood there with her eyes closed, like she was making sure it was real before she let herself believe it. 9 years, she said, quiet, not quite to me. You kept 3 settlements alive that whole time, I told her. Nobody's writing that out of any record I sign. She looked at me then, the way I imagine her guard should have looked at her the day they ran, like I was someone worth staying for. I've thought about that look more than I've thought about anything else from that job, more than the pay, more than the salvage. The manifest got amended that night. Her name went back into the record where it belonged, no longer among the unrecovered. I never did become anything official to a queen of the Kalen. I went back to crawlspace work eventually, tight seams and bad pay in the dark. But I keep the canteen she handed back to me, the one with her handshake still somehow in the memory of it. And some nights, I think about a woman who held a fracture in a planet, closed for 9 years, with nothing but discipline, waiting for no one, because that was simply what needed doing, and a man who finally showed up and refused, once, to leave.